Excellent. Welcome to the GPE webinar series. This series started in 2016 and we've had a full calendar year going into 2017. Last month we, together with our colleagues from UNICEF and Ministry of Education in Togo, Madagascar, wrapped up a very successful webinar on the Data Must Speak initiative, where country case studies were presented by partnered countries, in this case Togo and Madagascar. And we obviously very much appreciate partners' involvement in this webinar series. I am here at the GP Secretariat in Washington, D.C., joined by my colleague Dr. Karen Mundy, the Chief Technical Officer at the Global Partnership for Education. And we have online our two discussants who will present their intervention and their reaction to Dr. Mundy's presentation later on during this webinar. Ms. Seligier, Head of Profession for Education with the United Kingdom's Department for International Development, DFID, and she is also Chair of the GP's Grants and Performance Committee, the GPC. We also have online Dr. Randa Grob, Global Head of Education at Porticos, an international philanthropic organization, and Dr. Grob is also the Chair of our Strategy and Impact Committee, as well as our Private Foundation's GP Board Representative. Before we begin, I would ask that all of you, those on the computer as well as those over the phone, please mute your microphones so as to avoid background noise and make sure that we've got minimal disturbance during the webinar session, which, as an aside, is also being recorded, and you will have access to those recordings after the webinar, around 2 weeks after the webinar. To note that this webinar series is part of GP's Knowledge and Good Practice Exchange Initiative, which itself came about as a response to GP's partner countries requesting additional opportunities for exchange of knowledge that can inform policies and practices, mainly at the country level. And it also gives practitioners, we believe, the opportunity to partake in a continuous and sustainable practice of knowledge exchange between partner countries, and this, again, we believe, in turn will strengthen and help fulfill the national and global objectives of the Global Partnership for Education. In choosing the topics for these webinars, we include issues such as system strengthening, equity, learning, inclusion, partnership building, as well as the process of translating global commitments in the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals into country-level targeted financing objectives as some of our priority issues. In addition to this, the GP leverages these knowledge exchange sessions as visibility tools to shine a light on our work and the important contributions of our partner countries as we inch forward to fulfilling the promises of Sustainable Development Goal 4, quality education for all as well as lifelong learning, and the goals and strategic objectives of our own results framework. In this particular webinar, we will be discussing the findings and analysis of the GP Results Report 2015-2016, which was published just last month, in which reports on the baseline data of our results framework and highlights the progress made during the first year of the implementation of our strategic plan, GP 2020, as per the results framework indicators. And Karen will tell us what we found, and hopefully in the discussion that follows, we will also get to questions like, and what does this all mean, and obviously where we go from here. Now, before giving the floor to Karen, a few housekeeping notes. First of all, let me please repeat, please mute your microphones so that the presentation can proceed smoothly. Note that this is an interactive session, so after Karen's presentation and then the intervention of the discussants, there will be a question and answer session. To send questions for this question and answer session, you can use the chat application of the application that you are using. So if you're using WebEx, please send us questions through that chat application. If all else fails, feel free to send us question to email address webinars@globalpartnership.org. And if you experience any issue in your connection and in the participation in this webinar, also feel free to send questions to that email address. Note that the session is recorded, and around 2 weeks after this session, we will be sending around a minute with a summary of the session. And where is the case that your question could be addressed by Karen or one of the discussants during this particular webinar, be sure that it will be addressed in the summary that we will be sending out later. Now, without further delay, it is my great pleasure to announce Dr. Karen Mundy's presentation, Chief Technical Officer at the Global Partnership Federation.
Good morning, everybody. I'm waiting to see if the camera is working perfectly, and I can see that we've got lots of folks online from around the world. And it's really a pleasure today to introduce and provide an overview of GPE's first results report against its GP 2020, its strategic plan for the 5-year period that will end in 2020. I want to just start by giving you an overview of the architecture of the results report itself, which is built around GPE's theory of change, and its theory of change is aligned to its strategic plan. And what I'm going to do is just walk you through the main goals and objectives of that strategic plan and theory of change so that you can see how we build from at the bottom the supporting pillars of global level activities through country level activities and up to impact and outcome level objectives and goals for the organization. So for each of these levels, there are associated indicators, 37 in total, that describe or are used to monitor the outcomes around each objective. So at the global level, in our strategic plan, GPE focuses on mobilizing more and better financing at the global level and building a stronger partnership, including in areas such as monitoring and evaluation, knowledge exchange, and advocacy. At the country level, GPE's strategic plan focuses on 3 objectives, and I think this is very important because really the focus of all of our work, the main focus, is achieving outcomes at the country level. And primarily, GPE works through a model that links together sector planning, support for sector planning, strong support also for mutual accountability at the country level, and a set of grants that ensure the effective and efficient delivery of those goals and objectives set out in each national sector plan. GPE then holds itself accountable as a partnership for an intermediate outcome, that is strengthening education systems, and for impact. And again, our goals in the strategic plan at impact level are to improve and to ensure more equitable learning outcomes, including through early childhood development, and also to increase equity, gender equality, and inclusion across the partnership. So I think that then helps to set the stage for the results report, which actually works back chapter by chapter in the opposite order. So the first chapters look at the impact and outcomes of indicators we use to monitor goal 1 and 2. The third chapter focuses on goal 3. We have 2 chapters focused on country level outputs, and then at the end of the document, 2 chapters focused on the global level pillars, the supporting pillars in the theory of change. You know, results reports have different kinds of uses and objectives. Because GP is a partnership, the primary goal of this results report is to inform stakeholders of the achievements of the partnership, then to identify some of the challenges and to reinforce mutual accountability, and then to support the board of the partnership in setting strategic directions. So with those overview items in mind, I want to now turn, first of all, to the impact indicators monitored in this results report. Improved and more equitable learning outcomes, increased gender equity, gender equality, and inclusion are the 2 strategic goals against which we have impact indicators. First of all, around the strategic goal of improved and more equitable learning outcomes, the indicators demonstrate for us that even in very difficult contexts, there is a possibility for improving learning outcomes. So 13 out of 20 developing country partners show, using our indicator, that there has been an improvement in learning outcomes. And 2/3 of children between 3 and 5 in the developing country partners for whom there is available data show that they are developmentally on track. I want to emphasize here, however, that only a third of developing country partners, only about a third of developing country partners in GPE's partnership actually have data. So we're reporting on trends against a very small overall number of countries. And in the report, we emphasize the need for more learning outcome data and the need for more developmental data to support the ability not only of GPE, but every developing country to monitor its impact in the important area of learning. And we also describe some of the initial work on GPE's Assessment for Learning initiative, which intends to support developing country partners to improve their learning assessment systems and to have more reliable data to help them target their resources in ways that help improve learning outcomes. The second strategic goal, increased equity, gender equality, and inclusion. Just to overview that about 13 million children were supported with GPE funding. 745,000 more children completed primary school, and a similar number completed lower secondary. And GPE milestones for gender parity in completion rates were met. I think it's very important to note that while gender parity rates were met for completion at primary and lower secondary level, they were not met for out-of-school children, where girls remain significantly disadvantaged. So there are many more girls out of school than boys, highlighting the need in all of GPE's work to really focus on bringing children, and especially girls, into school. There are a couple of other challenges in this strategic goal area. First of all, when we looked at trends in pre-primary enrollment rates, our milestone for 2016 was missed. And in fact, we would say overall that despite initial growth in pre-primary enrollment rates, in this area, our partnership is seeing some stagnation. Primary completion rates sit below 90% in 21 developing country partners. And so we know that at the primary level, there remain some significant challenges. And of course, also at the secondary level, we're starting to see impressive growth in lower secondary education, but it's against a very low base. And here, so you can see that primary completion rates met the milestones for 2016. However, I think what you'll see is that it's within a margin of error, and therefore what we know is that there's some stagnation. You can see the curve of these lines flattening, and so there's still a need to concentrate in some countries, especially those 21 on primary completion. Pre-primary gross enrollment rate, here are just the overall numbers, and here you can really see the stagnation overall and also the deterioration, in fact, in fragile and conflict-affected contexts. Just to note that data for this particular indicator is not as strong. The underlying data is not as strong, so we'd like to see more years of trend before calling this deterioration. What we do know, and what we say in the report, is this is an area of major concern. So we want to focus on this indicator in the coming years to see whether progress resumes. Now I want to talk just a little bit specifically about progress on gender equality, which is an important objective in our strategic plan, and point out that developing country partners in fact exceeded targets for girls' completion of lower secondary education, something that was the focus of a reward to the partnership from the Children's Investment Fund, which congratulated us as a partnership on this performance of developing country partners. 28 out of 54 implementation grants in the partnership focus or tackle on gender inequality in 2016. So about half. Gender parity in primary completion is still a concern in 18 developing country partners. So what we're really noticing is that we need to have very targeted approaches to gender parity, particularly in a few countries. Many countries have achieved near to gender parity. And of course, as I mentioned, the gender parity for out-of-school children milestone was missed with a disadvantage for girls, signaling another area that we will take on as part of our strategy for addressing gender equality. Intermediate outcomes, strategic goal 3, focuses on proxy measures of systems and their efficiency. So we had strong results in 3 areas. 20% of public expenditure to education was achieved or increased in 78% of GP partner countries. As we all know, this is a very important indicator of national capacity to finance education overall, and it is part of GPE's expectation and requirements as a partnership that all developing country partners improve levels of public expenditure to education. And I think it's very important to say that it's one area where we know GPE countries do better than the set of developing countries on average, and that therefore we call in the results report to congratulate developing country partners to making progress in this area in particular. It's a contrast, as you'll see later, to progress made in international financing for education, which has not been as successful in its growth trajectory. The report shows that we've exceeded our milestone for pupil-to-trained teacher ratios. They are improving more rapidly than we anticipated, at 29% of countries achieving these strong ratios of pupil-to-trained teacher that's called for. I would just say here that you can again see that it's off a very low base, so it's really fewer than a third of countries that have achieved this pupil-to-teacher ratio of 40:1, but it is certainly the case that the numbers are improving. And then data availability. GPE, because as a partnership we focus so much on strengthening system capacity, we also believe that availability of data is important in the national planning cycle and as a resource to allow governments to target their resources. And GP partner countries improved their reporting on data and in fact exceeded milestones set by our partnership. 2 challenge areas. First of all, system efficiency, and again, just to highlight that this is against a very low base, so only less than a third of GP partner countries have data that allows us to look at our system efficiency indicator. What we are using as a system efficiency indicator basically is a formula for tracking repetition and dropout rates. And what we see here is that a large chunk of government resources are being used to finance children's learning of children who then drop out or repeat. And therefore you could say that there's wastage in the system, quite a significant share of wastage across that small number of countries who have available data. And we also monitor the quality of learning assessment systems using a rubric that's drawn from the Saber tool on learning assessment systems. And what we see here is that looking at the quality of learning assessment systems overall, a little less than a third of GP developing country partners have quality learning assessment systems. So these are areas of challenge for us at the systems level. I'm not going to present that slide. So I want to move on now just to highlight the area of more domestic financing and why that's so important. Just noting 2 country examples where GPE has played a role as a partnership in supporting governments to develop strong sector plans that in turn yielded good results in budget negotiations with ministries of finance. So Niger, of course, that has moved from 16.7% of total public expenditure to 21.7% of total public expenditure to education. And then in DRC, based on a new sector plan, the movement of education expenditure from 9% in 2010 to 17.8% in 2014. Both very strong examples of how developing country partners, even in the most stressed circumstances, can actually make strong advances in financing education. Country level objectives. So we monitor sector plans and their quality. We are monitoring the quality of policy dialogue, that is the engagement of diverse actors and the type of policy dialogue mechanisms being used, the joint sector review and the local education group. And then we are also monitoring our grant portfolio. So some high-level outcomes around strengthened sector planning. The report points out that GPE is the largest funder of sector planning in developing countries and has dispersed, has over $8.9 million dispersed to 29 countries for sector plans in 2016. 58% of the education sector plans and transitional plans were judged as meeting quality standards. Now, some of you might say, what is a quality standard? And it's important to note that GPE, working with partners, including members of GPE and the IIP, had developed a guidance on what a quality sector plan looks like, very much a consultative document that sets the standard for quality. And it uses those standards in that document as the measure against which it monitors quality of sector plans. And I think just to highlight that there are challenges in the sector plans, and so the methodology that we've used to monitor ESPs also allows us to hone in on some areas where we think partners could improve their practice and that GPE should support more directly. In particular, the consistent use of evidence to come to policy decisions and the development of plans that are achievable, that actually prioritize and have clear costed plans for achieving strong impacts. Mutual accountability is an area that is fundamental to all partnerships. And in our country-level objective on mutual accountability, we focus on two main indicators. One is the quality of joint sector reviews, and the other is the inclusiveness of local education groups. And here you can see that joint sector reviews, their quality against a set of milestones and guidance has actually improved and has achieved a strong showing, but still there's room for improvement. It's still less than 50% that meet these quality standards. In particular, when we monitored the aid memoir and the outputs from joint sector reviews, what we found was that the link to national planning cycles, and in particular, the kind of course correction and setting of revised objectives in the sector was not done as strongly as one might hope for. Local education groups, and just to mention that on the joint sector review issue, you may have seen, but certainly we can send as the follow-up to this a recent policy brief and a research paper on quality of joint sector reviews that has been published as part of GP's working paper series and has been a contributing paper to the Global Education Monitoring Report coming out this October. Local education groups, we monitor on this indicator the inclusion of civil society and teacher organizations in that local education groups. And in particular, we highlight here that 44% of legs in 2016 included both CSOs and teacher organizations. And here you can see on the following slide that in fact it's quite varied. Really, for civil society organizations, fully 77% of local education groups include CSOs. But it's actually teachers or teacher organizations that are less likely to be present in local education groups. And this is something that GPE has tried to address through a GRA, global and regional activity that supports a pilot to strengthen teacher organizations' capacity for dialogue, policy dialogue. But there's lots of room for improvement here. And of course, there's still a large share of legs where neither CSOs or teacher organizations are present, more than a third. Efficient and effective GPE grant support. So this really is a set of indicators that are focusing on the quality of GPE financing. Just some descriptive statistics about the grant portfolio. In 2016, GPE had 54 active SBIGs with a value of $2.23 billion in 49 countries. Of those grants, 56% were in low-income countries, 44% were in LMICs, and 60% of all disbursements were given to countries affected by fragility and conflict. Regionally, most of GPE's financing reaches sub-Saharan African countries, and in 2016, GPE also provided crisis funding to Chad, Yemen, and Burundi. That is allowing these three countries to retailer and draw down on their allocations to meet emergency or emergency needs for displaced populations. The indicators for Strategic Objective 3 are multiple, and I'm just going to focus on a couple here. First of all, we found that GPE grants are, in fact, doing some heavy lifting in supporting learning assessment and data systems, EMIS systems. We also found that results-based financing, the new GPE funding model, has been rolled out successfully in the first 5 countries who came up for implementation grants in 2015 and 2016. One country actually achieved its first milestone in its results-based tranche and was eligible for payment against that result. And we'll see a lot more information about this results-based financing tranche in the 2017 results report. The challenge really for GPE is in the area of timely delivery of grant components, and in the report we noticed that in particular delivery of school construction is often delayed, and also in the overall implementation of grants, which faced a slightly increased level of delay in 2016 as against 2015. All right, we're coming to a conclusion. We're going to look now at the 2 global level supporting pillars of GPE 2020, mobilizing more and better financing. And I just want to emphasize that this is really global level activities that support mobilization of more and better financing, and then building a stronger partnership. And here we have a set of sub-objectives linked to strengthening some of the organizational structures within GPE's secretariat, as well as strengthening some of the broader functions in advocacy, knowledge, and monitoring and evaluation. More and better financing, and I think this is where we have a sort of mixed story to tell you. First of all, based on our indicator, we did see that we had good initial results. Most donors, all donors in fact, did sign on, did meet the funding commitments that they had made in signed agreements. So that was a good success for us. However, and in addition to that, we also raised financing from non-traditional donors, particularly for initial work in knowledge and innovation exchange areas. Another good sign of success. However, we know that in the coming year, when we report on our financing, we will see a few donors that did not meet their signed contribution agreements, that is, that changed their commitments to GPE, that the overall context is one of declining financing for education from development aid, that currency fluctuations affect GPE's bottom line, and GPE presently does not have a solution for hedging currency fluctuations, so that has affected our bottom lines significantly. And we are, as I said, continuing to have some challenges in converting pledges into signed contribution agreements. So just to signal that some donors made verbal pledges at our 2014 pledging conference that were never changed into a signed contribution agreements at the same level as their verbal pledges. And then I want to focus a little bit on alignment. GPE places a great stock in partnership at the country level that aligns international financing around a sector plan. And in this report, we show that fewer than a third of GPE's large grants, our implementation grants, or SBIGs, are adequately aligned to national systems. And we, as a result of this finding, have an action plan now in place to to learn a little more about what the drivers are behind that lack of alignment, and to support grant agents and country-level partners to improve overall the use of national systems in their aid to education. I just want to highlight a graph then here off of this strategic objective. This graph really just shows you where we sit in terms of overall aid to basic education and all ODA to education. What you can see is that we're still below the highs of 2010 and 2009 and 2010, and that overall aid to basic education in particular remains less than half of the share of total ODA to education. I also just want to highlight the white line in the middle, because what we did was we just tracked the donors to GPE. How are they doing beyond GPE? What are they supporting overall in aid to education? And you can see that GPE's main bilateral donors are actually declining more significantly than overall ODA to education in terms of their net ODA to education. So that is a strong signal for GPE as a partnership, that bilateral donors perhaps have room for improvement in an area where, on the flip side, we see domestic financing improving, we see GPE donors to education aid decreasing, and we'd like to see both sides of the partnership improving. And this just shows you the overall alignment of GP grants to national systems. And again, I think we're pleased to send some further slides related to alignment so that folks can take a little closer look at the alignment indicators. It's actually broken down into different kinds of alignments to national systems, and we will be preparing a working paper that better lays out where alignment is happening and not happening. I think it's typically GPE grants are aligned to sector plans by definition. So that's a sort of 100% of our grants are aligned to sector plans. But are they on budget, on treasury, and so on and so forth? That actually varies quite a bit. And we haven't seen the kind of investment in strengthening national systems so that grants can be aligned that we'd like to see in our own grants. Finally, I just want to focus on the last pillar, the supporting pillar of building a stronger partnership. We have seen significant progress at an organizational level, and the results report highlights that GPE's secretariat staff time now prioritizes country-level processes, that there have been major improvements in quality assurance, risk management, and fiduciary oversight, as well as an uptick in the delivery of key knowledge and evaluation products to support learning and improvement across the partnership. And at the same time that those improvements have been made, the administrative costs of the Secretariat have been kept at 4% of overall budget. Now, the success in this level of organizational improvement has yielded, as I'm sure Sally will mention, a strong reward from DFID, which reported in its annual review that we had made these changes, so verifying externally that these improvements have brought this organization a long way. There is a challenge, and it's an ongoing challenge for our partnership, which is that at the country level, the roles and responsibilities of the local education group, of the grant agent and the coordinating agent, of the government that leads the local education group, that there remain concerns about who does what and how different actors are responsible to one another. And this is an area, again, where the Secretariat is advancing a work stream that focuses on clarifying how to improve local education group practices, working with developing country partners who have asked us for that support and for better guidance on how to make legs work. And we're also conducting, at the request of our board, a country-level capacity review to look at the effectiveness of country-level partnership roles and responsibilities. So just a final few slides summarizing. Overall, the results report highlights that 16 of 19 milestones were fully or partly met. And then it shows 3 milestones that were not met. As I mentioned earlier, pre-primary enrollment ratios, gender parity in out-of-school children, and grant alignment with national systems were the 3 areas where milestones were not met. A reminder that the report does not report on milestones for every indicator. So some indicators will not report on milestones because they were not set for 2016 but are set for 2017. Responding to this results report and its findings, the Strategy and Impact Committee of the partnership will be taking the results report and will be having a detailed discussion about how our partnership should respond to the findings of the report. But there are some areas where we already are moving ahead, where we anticipated some of the findings of the results report and already have interventions that respond to the challenges. On learning outcomes, where we saw the need for greater data. Of course, we have A4L, which focuses on improving learning assessment systems. We have a stronger requirement for data introduced at the request of the board for all GPE grants. And we are preparing guidance for variable tranche indicators to really firm up a focus on learning outcomes. We, on early childhood education, we launched earlier this year the Building Early Learning at Scale initiative that focuses on supporting developing country partners to improve their policies and plans by sharing best practices and policy experiences. We also have a gender equality strategy and an initiative that focuses on strengthening the gender responsiveness of sector plans. This initiative was launched in East and Southern Africa with a workshop co-hosted by UNGAI and with the publication of gender equality guidance and planning tools, which again we can copy to the email for summarizing this presentation. Mutual accountability, we saw where we have challenges. We know that we want to strengthen, developing country partners have asked us to strengthen and give them more tools for improving the functioning of local education groups, and development of that guidance is underway and will be delivered to the board in 2018. We also have a new funding initiative, the Advocacy and Social Accountability Initiative, that will launch again in 2018 to support and strengthen the policy engagement of civil society actors and teacher organizations. Finally, around aid alignment, a policy brief and best practice guidance is being developed by the Secretariat. It will be disseminated across the partnership and will become a point of policy dialogue between GP Secretariat staff and local education groups and grant agents in the coming year. And we have already initiated some conversations with grant agents to better understand why they continue to select project-like modalities as opposed to aligned modalities. With that, I'm going to conclude. I want to just end by saying thank you very much to Randa and to Sally for acting as respondents today, and also to the team here at the Secretariat who spent many, many hours designing and finalizing this results report. It's very exciting to have a tool to monitor the performance of a large partnership like GPE. I feel, and I know Alice feels, that this tool is one that helps us to stay focused on our core mission and mandate, and that will yield learning and opportunities for course correction and improvement in our partnership over the GP 2020 period. So thank you very much and welcome questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Karen. You have summarized a massive report in around 30 minutes, which is a feat in itself. At this point, we're very glad to hear comments from Sally Gear, Head of Profession for Education with the United Kingdom's Department for International Development, as well as Chair of our Grants Performance Committee. And may I just take this opportunity also to remind you of the possibility to send questions through the live chat. I believe we have not received questions so far and are looking forward to receiving them, as well as through the email address that we've mentioned. Sally, may I ask you to proceed, please?
Great, thank you so much, and thank you, Karen, for a really very useful overview. I think the main purpose of this seminar is obviously to encourage dialogue and engagement with all of you online. So I don't want to take too much time, but I'm really very happy to be part of this important webinar on the results report. Both in terms of representing a key donor partner for GPE, but also as the incoming chair of the Grants Performance Committee. So my sort of comments and feedback are with both of those hats on, if you like. And I think just to reinforce as we go forward, I think, in a way, the results report is very much on the partnership. It's not around the Secretariat. It's very much our collective responsibility and accountability. So going forward in our discussions, we can sort of be motivated through those achievements, which Karen has set out, and also collectively problem solve some of the remaining challenges as we respond to the report. And equally, I just wanted to say that having been involved on and off in some of these exercises in the past, that the collection and bringing together of the data in such a coherent way, this huge amount of data, it can't be underestimated. So I think, that fact alone, congratulations to the team at the Secretariat, all the country partners and grant agents who contributed. I mean, it really, it's a mean task, and you've done it very well and presented it in a very accessible way. I think, we've had the overview from Karen, and we have this sort of positive trajectory if we look at the milestones of the sort of 16 out of 19 we met or partly met, which is something to be celebrated. So I really just wanted to focus my short intervention on the sort of last slide, actually, which was the response to the results report. And in a way, this is sort of taking on board an idea of sort of this report is because it's very much a live document, is formative assessment. It's not a summative assessment. It's not terminal. It's not the end. So it's what we do with this information in these early stages, which I feel is the most important. So first of all, I think just to sort of home in maybe then potentially on a couple of areas. So I guess one of the key things that came out of the report was this quite, in a way, alarming statistic that only a third of developing country partners have data on learning outcomes. And this seems to me something that, given that the improved quality of education is what the partnership is all about, sounds to me like a rallying call for us to move quickly as we can in terms of improving our situation. So I guess the ways in which we could do this potentially, and it would be great to have debate over this. So Karen mentioned the A for All programme, and perhaps collectively we need to maybe accelerate this work, and perhaps integrate that acceleration into some of the upcoming high-profile discussions around replenishment coming up, getting more buy-in, getting more engagement. Potentially also, should we have a real clear plan for really in those countries that don't have that data, what's the strategic approach to that? How can we help and support? As I said, collectively, that's not the Secretariat at all alone, but it's donors and country partners. So really identifying those countries where the gap is and really supporting things to move as quickly as possible. And I guess the other area is around the work that I'm sure many of you are aware who are on the line on the global lead indicator on learning that there has been discussion around, and I know the GPA is playing a really good role as alongside the UIS. And the importance of something like that to bring about greater advocacy and awareness of how we really need to be able to measure learning, but also to raise awareness of the fact that even though many children are in school, the level of their achievement is still nowhere near as high as their counterparts in other countries. So this is an equity issue as much as anything else. So just some thoughts around that particular area. And then I'd just like to move on a little bit to the work of my role as chair of the country Grants Performance Committee, or Grants Performance Committee. Apologies, I used the old title. I was involved as a member of that committee previously, so it's old habits, I think. And this again speaks to the point I made around how we all need to in a way on our daily work in GPE, really respond to this report and quickly. So on the alignment issue, just to share with you and those online, we actually had a live discussion on this. We had a grants performance committee meeting yesterday. Last week, and it was joint actually. We had half of our colleagues in Washington and half in London, and we discussed really very practically how we were going to address this issue in terms of how we look at a grants approval, how we support countries through that process. And we agreed, although it is to be confirmed, that when we had the early information, with the early dialogue with countries in part of the grant approval process, that we did look very early on these issues of alignment and what was coming up and how we could support better approaches. So that's a real response in a way to the report just as it's been published, and to think how about let's integrate that more into our processes and systems. I think the second issue, as again Karen referred to, was the indicator on the timeliness of grants, and obviously being chair of that committee, in our sort of daily work on that, we have received a large number of grants asking for extensions, and this creates not only additional pressures at country level, obviously it creates further administrative pressures and uncertainty all around. So again, we're looking at real practical steps to see how we can work, particularly with grant agents, and I know the Secretariat has done a lot of work on that, to really ensure, first of all, that the timelines are realistic, of course, and also factor that into our recommendations to the board when we're approving grants. And I think you'll see a live example of that coming up at the board meeting in December. But equally, I think getting that balance right between completely recognizing that we're working and the situations in many of the countries that we support are affected by conflict, by events that are out of the control to a certain extent, and so we have to be flexible in the world that we're operating in, but equally getting the balance right, that it's not necessarily a given that the grants can keep on continuing, because obviously those children who we are accountable to desperately need that support, and there is an urgency now, I think, very much internationally and nationally, that we've got a huge job of work to do and we need to progress quickly. So I just wanted to share with you all just some sort of broader thoughts on some of the challenges that are faced and what we can do about it, and then just a few small concrete examples about addressing that within the committee structure and more broadly within the partnership. And I'd really hope and encourage that we use this document. We don't just sit on it and it's done and it's put away, but we really use it to inform our learning as we go forward, but not that we do a sort of, we hand it back in a way to the Secretariat to say, you do this. I think we all need to collectively learn from it and adjust and make sure that what we do is responsive to what we're finding through the work that's been done in collecting this data. So that's all I wanted to see. At the moment, I can't see anyone on screen. I just have a PowerPoint in front of me, but can I now hand over to the host, I think, who will introduce the other respondent.
Yes, Sally, you can, certainly. Thank you very much for those important points, a few broader points and a few more concrete examples, as you said. This will be addressed in a discussion which you'll have with Karen and the discussants, including obviously yourselves. At this point, may I please ask Dr. Randa Grob, the Global Head of Education of Portuguese and Chair of our GPE Strategy and Impact Committee, to make her comments with a specific view to what does this all mean for the partnership, and reminds everybody else to please send their questions. This is your opportunity to do so and to be part of these discussions. Randa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Moritz, and thank you, Sally and Karen. Can you hear me, Moritz? Everything okay over there?
Very well, thank you.
Sound is okay? Great.
Absolutely.
I just want to pick up where Sally left off before I jump in with some comments that were prepared. I think her last statement about using the data is really our imperative from the Strategy and Impact Committee. And it's very fitting with what Moritz began with. He spoke about a meeting around data must speak. And I think that's the whole point of this afternoon, and of course the next few months. So let me jump in first by thanking the Secretariat again for the invitation to comment. both on behalf of private foundations, as well as from my perspective as chair of the Strategy and Impact Committee. In the next few minutes, I hope to focus our attention on three key things. The first is some very important but unpublished results that are not part of that official pack, but still worthy of our joint attention. The second are a few additional critical lessons. Some of them echo what Sally just mentioned, but some of the most essential things we're learning from the set of results. And three, some special considerations in light of the replenishment. So if we move first to some very important but unpublished results, it may be obvious, but I think it's important to bring our attention to the fact that there are several very significant achievements to acknowledge. The first being the steady progress made in being able to shape and build the partnership itself. A collaborative crafting process with so many diverse stakeholders is not a small feat at all. And while we're mindful that not everything has been solved and there's a lot of work ahead, we should pause to remember and celebrate how far we've already come. Secondly, the steps taken and the commitment shown by GPE in both developing and aligning support around a first set of strategic objectives is also no small feat. This was a critical precedent to reach this point and a milestone which many new collaboratives failed to reach. It's really quite dramatic that we're at this point. Thirdly, the development and passage of a results and impact framework to measure our progress against those strategic objectives is another important accomplishment, all for the purpose of strengthening national systems. And finally, this report, as Sally mentioned, is also an accomplishment for all the mechanics and pieces to work, and it creates a kind of baseline as well as more clearly articulating the problems and issues in our way. So these four concrete and meaningful achievements, in my humble view, are nothing short of a landmark for global education, and they should be crafted into a very powerful narrative to both market the partnership during replenishment and beyond, but also focus, as Sally and Karen mentioned together, our collective ownership and our mutual accountability of both progress and our challenges. So if I shift now to the second key topic that I proposed around some of the essential lessons we're learning, I've chosen two. One is also alignment, as Karen and Sally touched on, and the second is data. There are others, but these are the two I'll focus on from the perspective of both foundations and from the strategy committee. So Karen clearly put forward in the package that grants are aligned with sector plans. That's not the issue. But even though grants may be aligned with sector plans, those are often not aligned with systems and therefore not leading to strengthened systems. The concern of prioritizing expediency at the expense of system strengthening has been echoed by many board members and among the partnership. And while recognizing that grant agents have their own processes and protocols, as the partnership, we must get creative in resolving this issue lest we miss the mark on this objective that is at the heart of our work. And I want to go a little deeper here. The matter of alignment of grants to national systems is of utmost importance. From a philanthropy perspective, now wearing my hat as the foundation's representative, our constituency holds a very strong belief in subsidiarity, and I've heard that echoed among the board members, which also means that decisions and ownership should be held as local as possible, so it means that lack of alignment signals gaps between what is being offered through GPE and what is actually needed to advance local education improvement agendas. I'm going to ask my GPE colleagues over there if you can mute on your side, because we're hearing your whispering and your static. Chandrani and Karen?
Hi.
I'm hearing some static from your side. Could you also mute just for the next minute? I don't know if others hear it, but I'm hearing quite some static from that side.
We also hear some static, but we're not sure that it's from our side. We are looking at whether there's something we can mute, but please feel free to continue.
I see. Okay, all right. Okay, I'll just continue then. From a strategy committee perspective, the lack of alignment means not only what we heard already, but also that significant investment of resources, not only money, but human resources at the local level, at our board level, at our partnership and secretariat level are being diverted away from strengthening national systems. Taken together, these perspectives underscore the need for the secondary analysis that's currently in progress and in preparation by the Secretariat in order to discuss what is causing the lack of alignment and what is needed to fix this. And Sally has mentioned some important actions
Thank you, Rhonda. Are you still there?
I am. Did you mute me? I didn't mute myself. Were you sending me a signal?
No.
Oh, sorry.
That was a joke. Okay, just a little more. What I was saying is that in addition to the actions that Sally mentioned that her committee is taking on, these follow-up actions are urgent and critical because a strong alignment between GPE funding and national systems is not only a matter of more and better financing, which is one of the GPE's strategic objectives, but actually a critical piece of the GPE identity and reflects the nature and strength of our partnership, and indirectly also reflects on efficiency and effectiveness. So in addition to targeted conversations with country partners and the forthcoming review that Karen mentioned of local education groups, and in addition to Sally's work that she just described in her committee, we believe all of these together could contribute to a feasible and co-owned set of recommendations to be in place by December. Second key point around data is that we've all touched on the criticality of having that strengthened. And I just want to reinforce that from the data we saw, most of this was based on 1/3 of supported countries. So even though the data and the story has been very nicely shaped and presented, it's critical that we find a way to boost the 2/3 that we speak about. And A4L was mentioned as one possible solution. There are others, and part of that could be drawing much more deeply on the partnership, including the business community, the data and technology specialists to help bring some of those problems to a much more manageable situation. So overall, if we look at the whole context of results, we're not going into every piece now. These results call for a number of actions. Karen and Sally mentioned what we do next is critical. So want to just put forward that GPE must be able to decide what it's able to act on and what it can't, and in so doing can really tap into the partnership to help solve some of these issues. For example, investments in LEGS would support such action and also deepen trust in GPE's model by ensuring that a diversity of voices are involved in policy dialogue and reflected in decisions. On behalf of the Strategy and Impact Committee, and almost in closing, I want to share that we're committed, once the further analyses are completed, to ensuring that the deeper learning and adjustment and alignment with risks and budgets happen as a result of this first monumental report. And if needed, we'll propose new indicators or modify existing indicators to better reflect those items to get us to GPE 2020. Finally, on the brink of replenishment and with acknowledged competition from new mechanisms coming online, GPE can feel free to extol the achievements that this report represents: a solid partnership model, a strong strategy, and a results and impact framework that helps guide its future actions. But we also urge that the GPE not shy away from its challenges and needed course corrections, but use these issues to leverage new partners who will be attracted to these challenges and who will be excited by the prospective impact that their involvement can have for GPE and for their own organizational work. Thank you for the opportunity to comment, and congratulations again.
Thank you very much for these comprehensive comments, Rhonda. That's great. With that, we are transitioning to the question and answer session part of this webinar. We have got a number of questions. Having said that, there's always room for more questions. So to everyone who's online, please feel free to send them either by email or to the live chat function. I'm looking to the right to my colleague Ian McPherson to know whether we've received any questions from the French-speaking live chat. No. We haven't. I would like to give Karen just a few minutes, if that's possible, please, to address the specific comments from Rhonda and Sally. And Karen, if you could take around 2-3 minutes, that would be fantastic. And then we might address some of the questions that have come from our participants.
Thank you, Sally and Rhonda. And just to say that, of course, I'm in complete agreement with all the points that you've made. And in particular, this imperative of using our results report and our results as a sort of ballast in our partnership ship so that we really stay focused on, are we achieving the collective goals and objectives of this very diverse and significant partnership. So that in particular, I think, is very important. It's the first year we've had a results report against a strategic plan. And so we're still flexing our muscles. And somebody has sent in a question asking, how do we plan to use this report annually or over the course of the next years? I think what you're going to see is that this report will seed many conversations across each of the governance committees, board committees, in areas specific to their domain of delegated authority. So the Strategy and Impact Committee will be using this report to develop a set of management actions or an action record against areas where that committee and the board agrees there's need for further remediation or action to take. It will also be referring some of the items in the results report where there are key challenges onto other committees, as for example around the case of the alignment indicator, which has been taken up by the the grants committee. So I think that's very, very important. I think the overall emphasis on this crisis in data is very important and raised both by Sally and as an opportunity by Rhonda. And I think this idea of taking your challenges and making them opportunities for the partnership to contribute to, I think is very, very well taken and very important. And indeed, as we look through the work on the new knowledge and innovation exchange, I think data is one area that, in a sense, isn't it's a cross-cutting priority for our partnership. We know that national sector plans can't function without good data, planning can't function without good data, that you can't have mutual accountability unless there's good, transparently available data. And we know that it's hard to target resources effectively to achieve equity goals unless the data on different marginalized populations is available. So I think in all of these ways, in addition to the support provided through our grants, there's something that we as a partnership can do, leveraging both business, private sector, foundation, bilateral, and technical agencies around a common agenda for solving or addressing the data challenge. I would just also, so I've touched the alignment issue, I've touched the data issue, I've touched a little bit on the use of the report. I just want to signal that this is just the beginning, folks. This is our results report against a set of proxy indicators monitoring our strategic plan. We are also now launching our evaluation strategy, and you will start to see real-time data coming from country level and programmatic evaluations that actually allow us to drill down on some of the areas where we have challenge and ask questions about how effective our partnership is. For example, at the country level, is our support to education sector planning as nimble and agile and achieving the things we hope it will achieve? What can we learn from our experience over the last 3 years of supporting sector plans through the ESBDG? And how is our country level partnership functioning? And is that country level partnership really behind the sector plan and pushing forward the implementation of the key priorities established in sector plans? That will come out from our country level evaluations. So this report in coming years will include not only the indicator data, but also findings from our evaluations, high level findings from our evaluation. And all of this will create a very strong platform for monitoring our performance and also for thinking through course corrections for our partnership. And I also agree with Rhonda that it will create a foundation for other partners to pool their intellectual, financial resources around a common policy table, really focusing on supporting national education systems. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Karen. There's more questions and there's an opportunity for you to go deeper into these things if you like later on in this discussion. There's one question that's coming up that maybe I will direct first to Sally, and maybe Rhonda can then respond to the same question, and then maybe also yourself, Karen. So if there's one thing that you think that the partnership should address, or should address to a greater extent, to address any of the challenges that have been come up or have been flagged in this results report, which one thing should that be? Or would you rather say that there is not one priority area that we should address now. We should look at things across the board. Sorry, Randa, would you like first to take that question from your end, please?
Sure, I'm happy to. It's a great question, and I think there are many choices, there are many possibilities. I would have to say, I'm speaking personally. I cannot say we've discussed it this way in our committee, but I would say it's about, so when we discuss the alignment result at the board, I also came to learn from a number of partnership members that they face the same issue internally. And so if we are not all working towards the goal of strengthening national systems, we're in trouble. And so it seems to me that a key place to align first is the vision of what we're all working towards and making sure that our work is aligning to that vision. There are many other smaller things that come from that, but for me, that's an overarching North Star that is important to raise quite high.
Thank you, Randa. Sally, on your end, if there's one thing that we should be looking at or should be looking at more as a result of what we found through this results report, what do you think it should be, either on behalf of DFID or on behalf possibly of the Grants and Performance Committee, or just in general?
Thank you very much. Yes, and I promise that, even if I'd gone first, I would have said the same thing. I have to agree with Randa. It's always difficult. The easy option would to say there's lots of things, but I'm not going to take the easy option. I think this issue of system strengthening is a really important one, and so this question around alignment. But I think just to add, from my perspective and my experience, I think it's around understanding why, rather than saying we must. Because I think there are definitely reasons, and Randa's right. Within our own organisation, we've come we've come up with this issue, of course, and have tried different modalities working with countries over the years, and there's differing views, etc. But I do think what would be an opportunity to use the very useful approach that Randa referred to would be actually to really understand the why question here. Because obviously grant agents and others are making choices about delivery options, and I think we need to have that open dialogue, as well as obviously the overall aim is a system strengthening approach. But what are the reasons why this is problematic or difficult? The sort of types of modalities that we would like to see ideally are more difficult in certain countries, and why are different modalities chosen? So that's the only other addition I'd mention to this point.
Excellent, Sally. And that seems to be calling for more research into things that we found. We've got some more questions from the email, but maybe first, Karen, would you also like to address this last question?
It's a very hard question to answer, and I am going to take the perhaps less ambitious approach and just say that it's really, to me, very important that we focus on challenges up our theory of change. What does that mean? It means that we really have created a strategic plan that says, if we do this, we think this will happen. And if we do those things, we think the next thing will happen. And so it's very important that we retain balance. And although I agree that this focus on national systems is at the apex of the challenge, all the pieces underneath need to be monitored carefully. And because that's the way I would look at this question of what's the key challenge, I would actually take not one of the findings from the results report, but just an overall observation. GPE, one area where it really hasn't realized its full potential and can realize it is in becoming a learning partnership. And this results report, to me, signals to us that opportunity. And that's the area, that's the challenge that I feel most obsessed with at the moment as we try to design our knowledge and innovation exchange activities, as we think about how to use these results, how to get our evaluation strategy. It's really, how do we as a partnership build momentum around key policy challenges and their solutions? And how do we learn from one another so that alignment, and I don't mean alignment simply as in terms of whether our grants are aligned to national systems, but so that our partnership is actually harmonized and aligned around a very clear set of goals that we track and that we hold ourselves accountable for. So how do we learn and how do we align? I think both very important challenges that are almost at a meta level, one step above what the results report is telling us in terms of specific outcome, impact, and output measures.
Excellent. Two more questions have come in via email. I think due to the nature of the question, they're directed more at our CTO rather than at the discussants at this stage. But after that, there is one other question that I might use abuse my position as a moderator here to ask all three of you. Karen, so one question that has come up is, can you elaborate a little bit on the quality standards for transitional educational plans? And how does GPE work with UNESCO International Institute for Educational Planning in the guidelines around this? I suppose, and the other question is, what are the plans for the global partnership to increase civil society engagement in LEX and country level processes?
So I'll just say a couple of words about transitional education plans. GPE worked with IIEP, the International Institute for Educational Planning, and a group of technical reference folks, including from developing country partners, to develop quality standards for transitional education plans that are slightly different from the full-blown standards for education sector plans. Transitional plans have a slightly different objective. They're usually more narrow and more focused than an ESP. That is, they're not required. The requirement is not to be comprehensive, but actually to prioritize what is achievable in a shorter time frame, with a very strong focus on ensuring that systems stabilize so that they then can move into a longer strategic sector planning period. Also, transitional plans meet their quality standards. Of course, data is still required, but there's a lower bar, lower set of expectations around what kind of data will be available. For example, in most countries affected by particularly conflict, the availability of administrative data is interrupted, and so you have to use other forms of data to come up with your evidence for planning. So those quality standards are drawn from the Transitional Education Plan guidelines. You will find those online, and we'll also include those as part of the email communication. And if you have further questions about them, I'll be glad to refer you to the lead of our systems and planning team, Rafael Martinez, who can explain more about the detailed components of the TEPs. Just a wry observation about TEPs. Most countries don't really like to call their sector plan a TEP. And it's actually kind of interesting to see that, and I think actually heartening. So even countries in the most conflict-affected or fragile circumstances actually want to consider their sector planning as a full-blown sector plan. And I think that's been a kind of interesting insight that we've had. And so in the Secretariat, we actually we make a judgment call as to whether we think a sector plan is really driven by a conflict or fragile context to be falling in with a TEP. Countries don't call their plans TEPs. Increasing CSO engagement, and I think I just want to say increasing CSO engagement and teacher organization engagement. I think these two things are very important. As you've seen, there's strong participation by CSOs in a large number of contexts, and less strong by teachers' organizations. But the net of it all tells us that there's lots of room for improvement. What are we going to do to move the needle on CSO engagement? Well, for many years, this is the second round of GPE financing for the Civil Society Education Fund, which provides sort of core financing for national coalitions to engage in the policy dialogue table. So on that side, GPE has continued to provide some funding for national coalitions so that they can become engaged in local education groups. This is the first time we actually tracked how many local education groups had civil society participation. It's our baseline and first-year reporting, so we don't know what would have happened without the CSEF monies, but I suspect that the CICF monies have done a lot to improve the participation of CSOs. We have also included in our development of guidance on local education groups a stream addressing and providing guidance on how, from the civil society side, to get access into the local education group, and then from the government side and other partner side about the importance of civil society participation, and again, sort of setting almost norms and expectations that lengths should include civil society representation. GPE's board approved a financing and funding framework that has a specific stream that focuses on improving advocacy and social accountability. In other words, improving the engagement of civil society actors around policy, sector policy dialogue at the country level. And you will see more on this. It will include a continued window for supporting national coalitions, as well as a window to support civil society social accountability work at the national level, and then finally a global level process. So I think this new ASA, Advocacy Social Accountability Initiative, will be the main financing tool that GPE uses to leverage and support improved CSO engagement.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Karen. The last question that we have here for the moment, and we have got some 8 more minutes, so please do still send in your questions either by email or the French live stream or the English live stream if you want. It's about evaluation strategy. As many of you might know, our M&E strategy stipulates that the Global Partnership implement an evaluation strategy in which we will be looking at what GPE does at the country level and beyond in more depth. I would like to ask the 2 discussants and the presenter on this evaluation strategy, and Sally, you already said that understanding why we see the things that we see in the results report is very important, and probably the evaluation strategy can play an important role in this. Would like to ask all 3 of you if you could briefly comment on what you would like the evaluation strategy to do over the years to come. Which questions do you want this to address and hopefully to answer? And maybe from Karen, a few words about what we, for the moment, are planning for this to do. This time, Sally, would you like to kick off and give us your views on that, please?
Yes, sure, of course. Thank you very much. And great question again. I mean, I think these comments will, because I'm just responding, obviously I haven't consulted more widely, so I guess these are personal, just based on sort of experience, and obviously, there have been evaluations undertaken previously on the GPE. I guess, and I think really, I mean, I'm afraid it's not very innovative, but I mean, I think just reiterating the point I made on the alignment question more broadly, I mean, understanding the why is really key, and I think that speaks to Karen's point about the learning organisation and using the partnership to learn. So I think that embedding the evaluation strategy very in a live way with lesson learning is really important. And I think speaking to that, and I hope I don't speak out of turn here, I think as well, I remember maybe it was about 6 or 7 years ago, there was an evaluation done, and it was incredibly detailed and incredibly quite difficult to access. This was prior to the one that you led, Karen, I need to hasten to add. But I think it's very important that this is an accessible document and that it's really used for learning. And so I really encourage that. And then just the second point would be around the theory of change point that Karen has just made. Obviously, that's going to be key to tests, and I'm sure that's already there in the design. And forgive me, I haven't had a chance yet, just coming back into the work of the GPE, to really look in detail at what's been done so far on the evaluation strategy. So I'm sure others more knowledgeable than I will be able to give more interesting insights. But I think they're the points that I'd really like to carry, to put forward to you. So yeah, I'll finish there and let Randa and Karen come in.
Thank you very much. Randa.
Thank you. Thank you. If I think about what I would like to see in the M&E strategy, the part that I would raise and make much more concrete and explicit are the enablers, so that the critical enablers for each strategic objective. And for example, two come to light very quickly. The partnership is mentioned again and again, and there are a set of indicators around it. But I think that we can be much more concrete and go deeper on what it means to have a strong partnership. Just for example, the density of our network, the way the network is used, the way expertise is leveraged, not just sharing information, the way that strategic goals among our partnership organizations might be reflected in one another or at least built on one another, things like that. And another critical enabler we've seen is data, not just that it's available, but what are the enablers along the way and what can the partnership indicators reflect to meet those things. So enablers in general, I think, can be much more clearly articulated. And then overall, I'd like to see us, it's not really answering the question that Moritz posed, it's more general. I'd love to see us, now that we have this report, work much more explicitly together to honor the strategy that was developed, to honor the results framework that's been developed, and to hold all of our work up to a light and ask ourselves clearly, are we prioritizing appropriately based on the objectives we have and based on what the results framework is telling, the results report, is telling us, and to ruthlessly prioritize because there are a million things to do all the time. So I think this report gives us a hand to be able to take those steps in the future.
Fantastic. Karen, would you like to say a few words about the evaluation strategy as well?
I would just be very concrete and just let everyone know that a firm has now been selected to undertake our country-level evaluations, and those will start to roll out and results come into the partnership in 2018, the second half of this fiscal year. It's very important that, as Sally said, we use the country-level evaluation process, which has both summative and prospective evaluations, as part of that larger evaluation set, country-level evaluation set, that we use it as a learning opportunity, and some of that learning will be in real time around the prospective evaluation. So I'm looking forward to having further conversations with partners about how to make that evaluation stream, the country evaluation stream, as effective as possible. And of course, I agree with everything Randa said about leveraging partnership and thinking about data as an enabler. And it's very much top of mind inside the Secretariat, and I'm sure at the board level, that this need to ruthlessly prioritize is an essential piece of what the ways in which we can use this results report to provide more direction and more focus on performance for the overall partnership.
That's fantastic. One last question has come up in the meantime, and I would not like to let this opportunity pass to still post it, given the fact that we've got a few more minutes, and it is directed at a representative from DFID. Sally, so the question has come up. You talked a little bit about scaling up the AFRL initiative, given the priority of learning, and that we know that access doesn't always necessarily translate to learning. The question really is whether you could say a little bit more about how the international community, how they fit, how the partnership could take that challenge on. Would you like to say a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, sure. Of course. I guess I'm a bit short of time. Are we? I think the main point, perhaps, I was making was rather more around urgency than scaling up. I think it's about moving that forward to see how that's going to develop with more of in more of a timely way, given that we've got this data. I think that was more the point I was making. So just a point of clarification. I mean, I certainly feel, yes. I mean, obviously DFID has prioritized the importance of the measuring learning. I mean, I think it's also important to say that again, it's that measuring learning shouldn't just be an end in itself. Obviously, the key for this is so that we can use that information to actually feed back into improving the inputs and the quality of learning. So I think that's why we are equally interested in, for example, the work that the PAL Network's doing, citizen-led assessments. So making sure that information about learning is fed back into the system. So I think the point that was being made was rather more about, speed and urgency. But equally, I think just to say that I think the learning outcomes information is important, but it's how we use it also. So in terms of our work going forward, we're very much closely working with GPE, with UIS, with the work that the World Bank's doing, with other donors' work, and bringing in the citizen-led approach to making sure that it's definitely a sort of a round group of organisations, institutions and interested donors, as well as working with country governments.
Thank you very much, Sally. So we are coming close to the ending of this webinar. Before wrapping this up formally, however, I'd just like to give Karen and Randa the chance to have one last word about what all of this means. Is there any last thing that you would like to say? Randa, is there any last thing that you would like to say?
Just thank you to the GPE Secretariat and the partnership, and to those who joined and shared their questions. I think that if they continue to share offline, that would be highly appreciated. And it's, again, as Karen said, a step in the journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Randa. Karen.
Again, for me, I will just say thank you to everybody. It's been a long year preparing the report. We're very happy to see it out there. If you have suggestions for how to disseminate the findings of this report beyond this webinar, please come back to the webinar team and they'll be collecting your inputs. What I think is most important now is that we start to socialize the results report and the use of these results, and then we build that foundation for our learning organization. So really welcome any inputs on how we can do that effectively at this point in our cycle of results reporting, our first annual cycle of results reporting. And thank you for everyone who's participated, Randa, Sally, for your trenchant comments, and for all those who joined.
Thank you, Karen. With that, we come to the end of this webinar. I would also like to thank the presenter, the discussants, Randa and Sally, and the participants for joining. Also thank the team which has made this possible, Chandrani, Farid, who is hidden, but he is absolutely there. Taking notes, and Ian. Speaking of which, so the notes of this seminar will be sent around within around 2 weeks. A package will be sent around, which includes the presentation, and any questions that have been sent but have not been answered in this particular session will be answered in that package. And I understand that there's a number of other documents that will be sent with that package that will be sent out in 2 weeks. And that will also include a recording of this session, and a link to that recording will be sent. It is difficult to summarize the main points of this webinar, which I was asked to do. Let me just stick with 4 points that I think really stick out. One thing that was specifically mentioned by Sally is that, okay, we have this results report, but to understand why things are happening as they're happening and why things are happening as we see among our results, we really need a deeper understanding, and the evaluation strategy can play an important role in this. And then we shouldn't just think about why things are happening the way that they're happening. We should also think about what we can do to address those challenges. And this is why Randa, I believe, and then Karen reiterated that point, we need to think about enablers and see at the system level what things can be done at the partnership level, and so not just here in Washington, actually country-led, to make sure that that these enablers are used. Addressing the data gap will be a priority going forward, because without data, accountability is not really possible, and understanding what's happening in your system is really difficult, as Karen mentioned. And finally, I believe, but I might be misinterpreting this, that what the group of presenters and discussants are saying on this occasion is we should not necessarily look for one big thing or one silver bullet that we should be addressing and looking at. We should keep looking holistically with the theory of change in mind, where we've got our outputs, our outcomes, and then our impact. But while we are looking holistically, we should still prioritize, as Randa said and Karen reiterated, because there's so many things we can do, but we should not be doing everything and should probably be focused in order to be effective. With that, just to say that there's an upcoming GPE webinar on the 27th of July of this year. As I've said at the beginning of this webinar, there has been a webinar about the Data Must Speak initiative in the French language. On the 27th of July, we will have the Data Must Speak initiative webinar in the English language, and whereas in the first iteration it was Togo and Madagascar who presented their experiences, on this occasion it will be Nepal, the Philippines, and Zambia. With that, thank you all very much, and we hope to see you on the 27th of July.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.